let's do an experiment. How much does your flour affect your dough and therefore your final sourdough bake? Welcome, Tammy Sourdough family. In this experiment, I am going to be comparing the difference of 100 grams of wholemeal bread flour, or whole wheat bread flour if you're in America, versus 100 grams of plain flour, or if you're in America, all-purpose flour. So just to clarify, I used 375 grams of white bread flour and then either 100 grams of plain flour or 100 grams of wholemeal bread flour. To this, I added 130 grams of unfed starter. I actually had to use 2 different starters because one of them ran out. And to make it fair, I added a bit of both to both. So that's why there's 130 grams of unfed sourdough starter. I know it's controversial, but it's just what I did. I also know that these aren't Instagram beautiful jars, I know. What can I say? It's what I have and it's what I used. I actually made these up for my neighbours to give to them, but in the end they weren't able to pick them up, which is why they went unfed on my side, and now I'm using them. As you can see, I've really mixed those starters in well, and it does lend to a very wet dough because we put a lot of starter in and a fair amount of water, so that makes it even more interesting, as the dough texture, as you can see on the left, is very soft and supple is the best description. This is my first set of stretch and folds. I didn't want to show you every single set because otherwise we'd be here all day. So I'm going to show you the first and fourth set of stretch and folds. Right from the get-go, I find this quite interesting, even on the first set of stretch and folds. The dough on the right that's got the wholemeal bread flour in it is quite structured compared, you'll see in a minute. This is stretching nicely. I managed to do 5 of the stretch and folds. And yeah, you can see it tightens up nicely by the end. And you will see that this one on the left, I can just keep going and going because the dough is very sticky and stretchy and just very, very soft. And that really is that plain flour, or that all-purpose flour, if you're in America, really does make that difference of the structure. You'll see on this dough, I really do carry on doing the stretch and folds until I feel like the dough is starting to tighten up. That actually ends up being 8 stretch and folds compared to the 5 on the other dough. I find that really fascinating because it's just further proving that that strength and that structure, that gluten structure, forms much quicker and just much more efficiently on the wholemeal bread flour. When it comes to stretch and folds, I really do think it's important to read the dough. How is it stretching? How tight it is? How hard it is to stretch the dough. Once it starts resisting the stretches, it's time to stop. And I have had doughs where they were so tight that actually they didn't want to do more than 3 stretches, and standard is 4. So it just shows that really is important to read the dough and how it's stretching, and just really just do go with your dough and with your gut and not with the instructions. You can see this is the 4th set of stretch and folds, and the dough's really tightened up now, especially on the right. You can see it's just very much tight into a ball by the end. I find it even more interesting that on the left-hand side, you can see the dough is still more supple, more malleable, less taut and together, and just able to do more stretch and folds, despite the fact that I actually have done more stretch and folds each time I've done a set. So for example, 8 the first time, that was 3 more than I did on the right hand side dough with the wholemeal bread flour. It does really back up the importance of the quality and protein content of your flour. You can really see that they've come together nicely after all the stretches and folds. And in a minute, I'm going to cover them and I'm going to leave them on the counter side until morning to prove. It is quite chilly here in the UK at the moment, so I definitely think I'm proving them a lot longer than someone else might be in a warmer climate. I was quite happy with the prove. I do feel like the dough on the left was much more jiggly, and I felt that it was a bit cuspy. I felt like it could have been overproved. It was really hard to tell. I want to know what you guys think. Let me know. Do you think it's slightly overproved? It definitely jiggled a lot more than the right-hand dough with the wholemeal bread flour. Part of what I found hard to separate out was that wholemeal flour is always more absorbent. So the dough will always feel drier and not as jiggly, I find. And so it really is hard to tell whether it's a lack of proving, or rather that the other one is overproved, versus a higher wholemeal content, or just a wholemeal content full stop. I really tried to speed this bit up for you. I'm just doing a pre-shaping, but I wanted to put it in because I wanted to show you the difference in the suppleness and texture of the dough in this first shaping. You can see that this left-hand dough, which is actually, sorry, the wholemeal one, is keeping its shape okay. This one, however, when I turn it out, it just feels a little bit like a sticky mess, if I'm perfectly honest. And I think at one point you can hear me kind of scoffing to myself at how hard it is to handle. I've sped it up, so you're not watching it for too long, hopefully. As you can see, it's sticking, and I think without my bench scraper or dough scraper, it really would have been an even worse nightmare to handle. I did use a fair amount of the gluten-free flour, you can see in the background there, just because it was impossible to handle. I then leave it to rest for half an hour, and I actually do a time lapse so you can see the difference in the dough. You can really see the right-hand dough, which is the one with the plain flour or the all-purpose flour, is just spreading out so much further and faster. The left-hand dough keeps its shape just so much more nicely. In a second, quick reference shot to what it started like, and you can see how much is spread out. On to second shaping using my dough scraper. Plenty of gluten-free flour on the right-hand side dough with the all-purpose flour, as it's just so hard to just pick up and even turn over. You can see when I'm trying to shape the dough, it's not very easy because I pulled it a slightly bit and it felt like it went a mile. It stretched a mile in my fingers. So the shaping of the dough is quite pleasant. It's a very soft, supple dough, but it doesn't make super easy for shaping. Just stitching there, and then I'm going to do a roll. I think at this point I very much question, is it very sticky, supple, a bit messy because of the plain flour, the all-purpose flour, or is it because it was slightly overproved? And I question, is it because that the dough wasn't able to absorb the amount of moisture because the plain flour, all-purpose flour, couldn't absorb that amount of moisture, whereas the whole wheat flour really could absorb it and then handle it? Does that mean then that it proved quicker and that's why it's a sticky dough? Or is it just that plain flour, all-purpose flour just lends to a sticky dough? That's what I'm not sure about. I want your opinions, guys. Do tell me. You can really see where I cut out 3 seconds, the difference of 3 seconds on the dough, how lax it is, how quickly it relaxes, even though I'd literally just shaped it and left it for about 3 seconds as I reached over to get the bowl. So yeah, it's not got a huge amount of structure. I'm just stitching inside my bowl here because I really want to give it the best chance to give me a good rise and have some tension, which it really doesn't want to give me any tension. Frankly, after the other dough, this felt like a dream to handle. It felt beautifully proved. You can see I'm just like, oh. It feels so nice to handle. It's just really just a beautiful dough. It feels perfect. It feels right. In the shaping of this dough, I actually had too much gluten-free flour on the surface from the other dough, and I end up scraping it aside. You can see it on the counter in the video, and it's actually a hindrance, not a help in this point, because the dough just really doesn't need it. It's not sticky, it's not overly supple, it's got a nice amount of structure, it doesn't stick to my fingers. It's just, yeah, it's brilliant, it's lovely, it's perfect. You can see I'm trying to create some surface tension and grab the dough, and I'm like, it's not gripping the counter because there's not a sticky dough. It's just perfect. So I'm like, get rid of all that gluten-free flour. I can't create any tension here on my dough. It's so fascinating how 100 grams of flour difference in both doughs has made such a massive difference in this point. The dough's handling, the dough's feel, the dough's look, all very different just from 100 grams of wholemeal bread flour versus 100 grams of plain flour, all-purpose flour. I only have one bowl that is the perfect size in my opinion for a ball, and so this one had to go into a much larger bowl, which I double walled then to try and help create some structure because the sides aren't as steep as I would like. I put both doughs in the fridge then. I prioritised the smaller bowl to help give structure to the much weaker dough. I took out what I felt was the overproof dough first because I felt like it didn't really need that extra hour in my fridge. And I also struggle with that temperature of my fridge. I find that my dough proves fairly quickly in both of my fridges. So yeah, it's a problem I have. So I can never leave it very long. So I never leave it more than 12 hours, absolute max. I'm scoring my dough. I'm doing it really quick because I don't want to lose all of the structure on the sides that the bowl has kind of helped to give it shape. And you can see it's just fanning out as quick as it can. So into my boiling hot Dutch oven that's been at 250 degrees for about 45 minutes. Slip down the middle of on the side of the dough, and in the oven it goes for 6 minutes, and then I'm going to do a second score. An ice cube at either end, and straight it goes in with the lid clapped on. I'm actually using the ice cubes for the first time during this bake, and I feel like it went quite well. This point it's been in the oven for 6 minutes, and I'm just rescoring it really fast. I don't want to lose much heat, and I just want to get it back in the oven ASAP. To all you sourdough geeks and buffs out there, I probably look like an absolute Neanderthal using a knife. I am getting a blade soon, but I also think it's very beginner friendly, which is what my channel is about. Total time in the oven was 26 minutes. This little reveal, I'm quite pleased on the rise considering, and the colour. I really thought, I was a bit worried that the dough was overproof, that it might be a little bit of a pancake, but thankfully it wasn't. To clarify, this was the 100 grams of plain flour, all-purpose flour. Onto our next dough and back to the same process. This is when you can tell that the dough was quite well proved, because when I turned it out, even though it didn't have a huge amount of structure from the walls of the bowl, it still kept its shape quite nicely, and I was just generally pleased with the rise on the dough. Please don't come at me. I know I need a scoring tool. My knife isn't doing the job very well. It's next on my list to buy. Same thing again, into the scorching hot Dutch oven at 250, and 2 ice cubes, one either side. One thing I want to mention is that I've always understood that wholemeal flour created a faster prove, but I think this really proves that the water content has the biggest tell and the biggest say over how quick things prove and how well the flour can absorb the water. Once again doing my second score 6 minutes into its bake in the oven. You're about to hear me tut as I forgot to shut the oven door and it lost a bunch of heat, so it may well have had an even better rise. Again, total time in the oven was around 28 minutes. Here's the reveal. I am quite happy with the bake. feel like it had a really nice rise, and it may have had an even nicer rise had I managed to remember to shut the oven door. So here is the all-purpose plain flour loaf. I'm pretty pleased. Came out well, but you can see that definitely is flatter than the other one. And then here we have the wholemeal bread flour. The loaf is much higher, it's got a better rise, more rounded sides. Lovely loaf. I'll show you them side by side. It's a really interesting experiment, this one. So yeah, you can definitely see like this, which one had the better rise, which one has got better air pockets. And again, this didn't actually do that bad. I was very aware. So they both proved the same amount of time. This one actually had an hour more in the fridge. They both had the whole night on the counter. And this one loved it, and this one didn't do very well with it. There we are, that's a better view. You can see better now the difference in the rise. What are your thoughts? So you can really see the importance of knowing the dough and seeing that this just did not work very well. It was okay, it's a nice crumb, it's good. But that one really loved it, and this one couldn't cope because it didn't have the gluten in the all-purpose plain flour. It just didn't like it, and it couldn't absorb the amount of moisture, and so it proved it really fast. Whereas this one, it loved it because wholemeal flour absorbs all the water. And so this one ended up being overproofed, whereas this one was perfect. And the only difference with the flour, the types of flour I used, which really shows the importance of knowing your flour. If you're using a little bit of all-purpose, it's going to give you a faster proof, which is great if you've got short on time. That's great to know, actually. Yeah, very interesting. Hope you enjoyed that little experiment. I'll see you next time.